and you need a rest. Here's the thing I love about the nature of our Father. If you need it, He walks into it with you. God doesn't need to die for sin. You do. Why should God die for sin? God didn't sin. You should die for sin. I should die for sin. But God did. Why? Because whatever you need, He becomes. That's beautiful. God doesn't need to rest. I need to rest. So God inserts a seventh day of rest in Genesis 2, knowing Paul White's coming along. That cat's going to work himself to death. I know him. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to show him how to take a real rest. He's going to miss it because he's going to be all treadmill performance religion. He's going to be JoJo the monkey boy for God. He's going to do all he can do in living for the Lord. I don't really know who JoJo the monkey boy is, but he's going to work really hard living for God. But I'm going to show him how to take a real rest. Let me show you just real quick. If I could, let's take Sabbath. Sabbath, we've already taken him off the shelf. Let's shove him into the New Testament for a minute, can we? Go with me real fast in Mark chapter 2. Just want to show you how Jesus dealt with this in His life and ministry, and I'm going to land this in what I think is the New Testament's ultimate passage on what it means to take a real rest. Mark chapter 2, Jesus comes into His first real verbal conflict over this Sabbath issue. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27, Jesus says to those, that the Pharisees, starting 24, I'm sorry. The Pharisees said to Jesus, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Jesus' disciples were plucking heads of grain as they walked through the field. Jesus said to them in verse 25, have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry, he and those with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and he ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat except for the priests, and he also gave some to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, man was not man made for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. What Jesus tells them is there was a time in the Old Testament where David was hungry on the run from Saul, and he went into the tabernacle and he ate the showbread. Only the high priest gets to eat the showbread. Jesus said, why did he do that? You notice nobody answers that question in this text because there's not a good answer. Because reality is what David did was illegal. It was against the Mosaic law. Only the high priest gets to eat the showbread. Why would Jesus use that example? Jesus is saying what you have worked out to be right and wrong in your interpretation of the law does not always equal good and evil in the eyes of God. And so Jesus says, while it was moral, it was legally wrong for David to go in and eat that showbread, it was obviously good in the eyes of God because God cut a covenant with David that promised his seed would be on the throne forever. Now, why would God do that if He was angry at David for eating the showbread? He wouldn't. And everyone that day knew that answer. But that's a tough one to wrap our minds around because the moment we admit it, we have to admit that the reason God gave the Sabbath was not for some structured and 24-hour rest. It was so that we would begin to honor that which is good in the economy of God. And honoring that which is good in the economy of God would be taking the rest that's been afforded to us through who Jesus is. Look at Mark chapter 3, same passage, verse 1. He entered the synagogue again. That's a bad chapter split, I believe, by the way. I think that would have rolled smoother if Mark 3 doesn't happen until verse 7, but I'm not up here trying to rewrite the translation, so we'll just read on, right? He entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him closely, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, step forward. And he said to him, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? Listen to that question. Notice, by the way, nobody answers this question. Verse 4, in fact, says they all kept silent. Why didn't anybody step up and try to answer that question? Because the answer goes against their mentality of honoring in the natural what they failed to honor in the spirit. What they honored in the natural was a 24-hour period on the clock. Don't do anything. What they failed to honor in their spirit was do good to your neighbor and love them and help them. Heal them if they're hurting. Go, we can't heal them. We're on the Sabbath. God goes, you've missed the point of Sabbath. It wasn't a time on the clock or the calendar. It was a time in the heart where you opened your ears to your neighbor and you watched where you could be of benefit. That's how to learn to take a real rest, is resting in the moments that the Father shows you you can love your neighbor. resting in the environment that is created by listening to the Holy Spirit. Everyone listening there kept silent. And when he looked around them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. As Lord of the Sabbath, folks, Jesus becomes our rest.